We look at classic firearms and see timeless craftsmanship, but we ignore a glaring mechanical contradiction. We bolted a living, breathing organism to a machine designed to contain violent explosions. Romanticizing the aesthetic beauty of a wooden stock blinds us to the reality that biological materials absorb moisture, warp under heat, and actively fight against zero-tolerance precision. By diagnosing these structural failures, we will expose exactly why the 10th century forced marriage between iron and what ultimately collapsed under the brutal efficiency of mass-produced polymer. This pairing was never a union of equals, but a marriage of convenience. When crude hand cannons emerged, primitive metallurgy meant barrels overheated instantly. Wood was drafted into service simply because it was the only accessible insulator capable of shielding the shooter. But as firearms evolved into high-pressure, rapid-fire systems, the biological constraints of timber became a fatal liability. Wood swells, shifts, and degrades. It is a material that grows, trying to survive inside a mechanical ecosystem demanding absolute rigidity. This brings us to a critical diagnostic question. Why did a material that dominated military arsenals for a millennium get systematically eradicated in just a few short decades? The transition to synthetics was never about modernizing aesthetics. It was the ruthless, inevitable eviction of a biological barrier that could no longer survive the mechanical matrix of modern warfare. As firearm mechanics evolved, the craft of wood selection matured alongside it. Over centuries, a process of elimination elevated specific woods to a gold standard, creating distinct philosophies of material use that defined entire empires. These choices were not based on sentiment, but on a cold calculation of geography, logistics, and industrial capacity. The pairing of Russian birch with rifles like the Mosin-Nagant and SKS was a masterclass in logistical optimization. Its primary advantage was structural. Birch trees grow exceptionally straight, minimizing the need to work around curved or irregular grain. This trait directly reduced machining time and material waste, stabilizing output for a massive conscript army. Furthermore, Russia's geography offered a virtually inexhaustible supply. The tree grows quickly with minimal cultivation, locking in a low and predictable cost base for decades of conflict. For the Soviet military machine, birch wasn't just a good choice. It was the only logical one, a purely utilitarian decision that prioritized immense volume and battlefield replenishment above all else. In the West, the title king of gunstocks belonged to Walnut, the material behind the M1 Garand, the British Lee-Enfield, and Germany's Kar 98K. Mechanically, its performance metrics in density and heat resistance were comparable to birch, making it a robust platform for a battle rifle. However, Walnut's value was amplified by its superior aesthetics. Its rich, complex grain patterns were highly prized, creating a material that satisfied both military function and civilian appeal. This dual-purpose nature gave it a broader market footprint, equipping soldiers on the battlefield while also serving as the foundation for prized sporting guns in the hands of civilians. This appreciation for wood's beauty inevitably birthed an entirely new class of firearm, the functional art piece. Marques like Italy's Beretta or Britain's Holland and Holland transformed the gunstock from functional component into a canvas. For a high price, master artisans would turn select cuts of wood and engraved steel into a unique, bespoke creation. These were firearms so exquisite their owners might never fire them, where the material itself was more valuable than the weapon's function. This established hierarchy, utilitarian birch for the East, versatile walnut for the West, and exotic burls for the elite, seemed permanent. It cemented wood as the definitive, unchallengeable material for a firearms chassis. But this entire system was built on a fragile assumption, that wood's inherent biological nature would always be an asset, not a fatal liability. The answer to that question came not in a laboratory, but in the sweltering jungles of Southeast Asia. The M14 rifle, intended to be the pinnacle of American wood and steel design, became the platform that exposed wood's terminal vulnerability. The weapon was a product of a peacetime, temperate climate mindset, but it was deployed into the extreme humidity of Vietnam, and the results were catastrophic for the material. The problem was not a defect in the rifle's design, but a fundamental flaw in its biological chassis. Wood is hygroscopic. Its cellular structure naturally absorbs ambient moisture, a process that accelerates dramatically in a tropical environment. American soldiers reported that their walnut and birch stocks were constantly swelling, deforming under the oppressive dampness. This wasn't a cosmetic issue. As the wood expanded, the precise, tight fit between the steel receiver and the stock, the rifle's bedding, was compromised. Metal components became loose, tolerances shifted, and the entire assembly began to warp. The direct consequence was a catastrophic and unpredictable loss of Zero. A rifle that was sighted in perfectly on a dry morning could have a completely different point of impact after a monsoon rain, rendering it uselessly inaccurate in a firefight. For the individual soldier, this meant their primary tool for survival could no longer be trusted. This failure turned routine maintenance into a desperate, logistical nightmare. The fight to keep the wood sealed against moisture, to protect its lacquer finish from being scraped away by jungle foliage, and to prevent the inevitable swelling became a constant, losing battle. The M14 wasn't just a rifle. It was a case study proving that wood, as a material, was biologically unfit for the demands of modern, global warfare. It had failed its most critical performance review on the battlefield. The biological failures of wood in humid environments were enough to condemn it, but the final executioner was industrial mathematics. In modern warfare, time is the ultimate currency, and wood is agonizingly slow. Consider the supply chain. A walnut or birch blank requires decades to mature in a forest. Once harvested, it demands months of kiln drying, resting, and meticulous grading before it even touches a lathe. A single hidden knot or grain defect during milling sends the entire piece to the scrap bin. It is a process bound by the unpredictable pace of nature and the subjective skill of a carpenter. Conversely, a petrochemical plant and an injection molding machine operate on a different plane of reality. A steel mold can stamp out thousands of identical, dimensionally perfect polymer stocks in a single afternoon. There is no curing time, no grain direction to respect, and zero variance between Unit 1 and Unit 10,000. The speed of the machine simply obliterated the slow growth of nature. But the shift wasn't just about manufacturing volume. It was a brutal upgrade in raw physical specifications. When you compare the mechanical data of traditional gun stocks against modern composites like the PA6 glass-filled nylon used in the M16 or the PA66 found in the AK-12, the biological material is completely outclassed. Polymer variants routinely deliver double or triple the impact resistance, tensile strength, and shear crush thresholds of the densest hardwoods. With splinters under extreme blunt force, glass-reinforced polymer merely flexes and returns to zero. This massive surplus in structural integrity unlocked a new era of weapon geometry. Because polymer is exponentially stronger per square inch, engineers no longer needed thick, bulky blocks of material to ensure the weapon's chassis wouldn't snap. They could cast incredibly thin outer walls supported by rigid internal ribbing. This manufacturing reality allowed designers to shave critical ounces off the weapon's total mass. In modern infantry doctrine, every ounce carried is a tax on a soldier's endurance. By replacing dense, heavy timber with hollow, high-strength plastics, the industry fundamentally reduced the marching weight of a rifle. The material swap optimized the physical burden on the operator, proving that a synthetic chassis was superior in both the factory and the field. Yet, stripping weight was only the first step in preparing the modern rifle for a much more complex structural demand. That more complex structural demand was modularity. Modern combat doctrine re-envisioned the rifle not as a static tool for firing projectiles, but as the central chassis for an entire ecosystem of tactical accessories. This ecosystem exploded with mission-critical hardware, magnified optics for extended range, red dots for speed, infrared lasers for targeting, and high-lumen flashlights for positive identification. Wood, as a solid, non-configurable block of material, was structurally hostile to this evolution. It offered no native mounting points. Attaching anything required invasive, custom gunsmithing, turning the weapon into a permanently altered, inflexible tool. A rifle set up for daylight operations could not be easily reconfigured for a nighttime mission, because its wooden furniture locked the operator into a single, unchangeable configuration. Every attempt to modify a wooden stock was a high-stakes structural gamble. Drilling into the material to install a screw for a sling point or a bipod stud was an irreversible act that created a new stress concentration. An incorrectly placed hole or an over-torqued screw could easily split the grain, catastrophically compromising the entire stock. There was no undoing the damage. The only solution was a full replacement. This made field-level adaptation impossible and turned arsenal-level upgrades into a risky and expensive process. The organic nature of wood meant every single stock was a unique problem, a lottery of grain direction and internal density. This chaos of custom modification was rendered obsolete by a single, brutally effective engineering standard, the MIL-STD 1913 Picatinny rail. This system provided a universal, non-negotiable interface for all accessories. Polymer, which could have rail sections molded directly into its structure or attached with perfect uniformity, embraced this standard completely. Suddenly, accessories became plug-and-play components. An optic could be detached from one rifle and mounted on another in seconds, retaining its zero. This level of absolute interchangeability was impossible with wood. Its inherent variability made true standardization a fantasy. The rifle was no longer a singular object, but a system of components. Wood failed because it could only ever be the object. Polymer proved it could be the system. This failure wasn't aesthetic. It was architectural, paving the way for the first true synthetic alternatives. The shift away from organic timber was not an overnight revelation, but a forced industrial pivot born from the sheer attrition of global warfare. By the First World War, the massive consumption of high-grade walnut left military supply chains starved. Forced into a corner, German engineers developed a structural stopgap, laminate wood. By gluing thin layers of wood together under extreme pressure, they created furniture for the G98 and later the K98 that was fundamentally superior to solid timber. Laminate resisted moisture warping and dispersed recoil forces across intersecting grain patterns. It was the first mechanical admission that natural wood, in its raw state, was no longer sufficient for industrial-scale combat. But the true material severance came with the weaponization of early synthetics. During the Second World War, the German war machine integrated Bakelite, the world's first fully synthetic thermosetting plastic, into its frontline infantry weapons. Components on the MP-40 submachine gun and the MG-42 machine gun utilized this heat-resistant, non-conductive compound. Bakelite did not warp in the mud. It did not require a master carpenter to shape, and crucially, once cast and cured, it held its dimensional tolerances permanently. It proved that a chemical compound could survive the thermal and physical abuse of automatic fire better than anything harvested from forest. This synthetic proof of concept set the stage for the total eradication of wood on the modern assault rifle. The definitive strike occurred in the 1960s when the United States fielded the M16, a rifle built entirely around aerospace-grade aluminum and fiberglass reinforced polymer. It was a stark, black silhouette that rejected biological materials entirely. The Soviet Union, despite a deep reliance on their vast Birch reserves, recognized the undeniable performance gap. While they initially relied on advanced laminates for the AKM, the introduction of the AK-74 marked their surrender to synthetics, heavily utilizing AG4 plastic compounds before transitioning to full polymer furniture. The two global superpowers had reached the exact same diagnostic conclusion. The frontline assault rifle had become a high-speed, mass-produced machine, and in that brutal mechanical matrix, there was simply no room left for a living material. Despite its obsolescence, wood retains niche advantages synthetics have yet to replicate. Its natural fiber structure provides superior micro-vibration dampening, a trait prized by precision shooters, and its acoustic signature is softer, a key benefit where a single sharp clack can betray a position. But these are now edge cases. Wood has been relegated to two opposing poles, the ultra-luxury ceremonial rifle and a desperate battlefield expedient. The verdict is clear. Its frontline service is over. It's time to return wood to the forest and surrender the modern rifle entirely to the cold, predictable world of machines and polymer.